it's really, really powerful. And the genetic genealogy is the key to that. And it brings a closure to these people, which is awesome to see.
Welcome to the Crime News Insider Podcast. This is Deputy District Attorney Jorge Del Portillo, and with me, as always, is Lori Hoff. How you doing, Lori?
Jorge, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Today's episode, we are going to talk about something fascinating, cold case homicides. The coldest case I've ever had was probably 3 years, which is the statute of limitations. But cold case homicide, it's a specialized unit in our district attorney's office, and a lot of other offices have it. And it's been a lot in the news with the Golden State Killer, as well as some other cases. The Golden State Killer, if you don't know, was a man that was a former cop named, what was his name?
Joseph DeAngelo?
Yes, his name was Joseph DeAngelo, and he was known as the Golden State Killer, also known as the...
He was the East Area rapist, and then he was the Night Stalker, but then there was another Night Stalker, so that's
original...
why he got renamed the Golden State Killer too.
That's right.
To encompass all of his crimes from I think it was from the 70s through the 80s.
Yes, and he would famously call police departments. I mean, this is kind of like straight out of a movie where he would call police departments and say, "I'm the East Bay Killer," or whatever he was, and you're never going to catch me, and would go out and commit a rape or a murder. And he finally got arrested in 2018 due to a new kind of tact using genealogy, DNA testing and comparisons. So today we have a special guest with us. His name is Brian Erickson. He's a deputy district attorney in the San Diego District Attorney's Office. Brian Erickson has been a prosecutor for 26 years. He went to California Western School of Law here in San Diego, was a deputy DA up in Tuolumne. How do you say that? Tuolumne?
Tuolumne, yes.
Tuolumne. That's up in Yosemite area. He was also a deputy city attorney here in San Diego and the head of the Child Abuse and Domestic Violence Unit. And within our office of the San Diego DA's office, he has done pretty much everything: sex crimes and stalking, human trafficking, domestic violence unit, gangs unit, the Superior Court team where he was a team leader, and then finally now the cold case unit. Brian Erickson, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Jorge and Lori. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. So can you tell us a little bit about the cold case unit and what it's all about?
Sure. The cold case unit in our office was established in 2003. Lately, as of 2018, is when we've really started heating up and being able to solve more cases through genetic genealogy, which I'll go more into. But basically what happens is a case, the police will be investigating a homicide case, and they exhaust every lead that they can. They collect as much evidence as they can. And they, unfortunately, in a lot of times, they just don't, get a suspect or find enough evidence where they can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. So what they say is the case goes cold, and I'm sure everybody's heard that, on TV and things like that. So a lot of times, cases in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even before that, murders will occur, and the police will investigate it, collect evidence, but not find a suspect. So it'll go cold, it'll sit on a shelf for a while. And recently, along with our office, when we've started kicking up these cold cases, the police departments locally, the San Diego Sheriff, the San Diego Police Department, La Mesa Police Department, I've had a couple cases with them recently, have really kicked up these cases and started paying attention to them. And a lot of the cases that we're seeing are cases where, like, for instance, I have a case from 1983 where there was evidence collected as seen. They happened to be cigarette butts. Well, in 1983, we were not, the law enforcement didn't have the capability of looking at DNA. So they didn't even know what to collect for DNA, which is amazing in these cases, because a lot of them, they collected things like cigarette butts, that knowing that this may have some evidentiary value. So later they'll look at them, and then they'll look at the DNA in a cigarette butt, and then be able to trace that back to a suspect that obviously would put them at the scene of the crime. So we do it through that. And as I said, genetic genealogy since 2018 we've solved 12 different cases, cold cases, through the use of genetic genealogy.
Wow.
And it's an amazing process, which we can, delve into deeper. But, basically these are cases that go cold, and then we look at them it's a corroboration between the police departments and our office, where we'll look at cases and see cases that we may have new evidence or a new set of eyes looking at them. So that's why we're most successful with these cases, is when we get a new set of eyes, whether it's a detective, whether it's one of our investigators, or even us as a deputy district attorney looking at it.
So Brian, originally, when DNA came along, it was a big deal for solving cold cases, because you go back to the cigarette butt that you mentioned and you say, okay, wow, it's been sitting in evidence for such a long time, but there's still somebody's DNA on it. And if we can find a match, all right, if that DNA comes back to somebody, then we could potentially solve this case. How does genetic genealogy take it to the next level?
Sure. And the one step before that, and I'll just mention that briefly, is there's another system called CODIS. And CODIS is a system where when a defendant's arrested and charged and found guilty, they'll take a DNA sample. And that's been recent. And so there is a database that the state holds of CODIS DNA where we can go to it right away. And the limitations to that, it's only arrests, the convictions, and to that extent. So a lot of times we'll have DNA at a scene, we can load it in that CODIS system, and we'll get a match through that, and then we'll be able to confirm it. But DNA has literally only been around in the criminal realm since the early 90s. So like I said, I've got cases from like 1983 where they had the wherewithal to collect a cigarette butt from the scene, and then a new detective looks at it 38 years later and sees an unknown DNA on that cigarette butt, put it into CODIS, and if the person has a criminal record where their DNA has been collected, we can find them through that. Now, where genetic genealogy comes in is when we exhaust that CODIS and we exhaust the state system of criminals whose DNA has been collected, then we're kind of stuck once again. So obviously everybody, if you watch TV or watch commercials or anything, you'll see there's different companies like My Ancestry and 23andMe. And that's where people can take their own swab, send it into the company, and then find out if they have relatives that they didn't know about. So within the last probably 5 years, this has become a huge thing, and people buy it for Christmas gifts and give it to their relatives. And this tracing of your genetic genealogy and your family tree has become really popular. So what's interesting is those are private companies, obviously, but My Ancestry and 23andMe, I use them as an example. They're two of the biggest companies. Well, they have millions of subscribers that use their business, but they don't talk to each other. So what different private people have done is they've formed, for instance, one of them is GEDmatch. And these people will take their DNA from 23andMe or My Ancestry or whatever company they've gone and load it into this clearinghouse, which is a public clearinghouse. And then you can find out if somebody who, submitted their DNA to a different company matches yours. So it really is a way of connecting with other people, which is the whole idea of why people have this. But it's a public database, and obviously needs to be, because you're looking for people, so you're sharing it. So for instance, we'll find, let's say, that cigarette butt, it's got DNA in it. We've exhausted the CODIS deal. Now we've got this DNA in a cigarette butt. So we can get what we do is we'll send it to a company, and they'll put it in that code that 23andMe or My Ancestry would have. And then we load it up into one of these public databases to see if we get any sort of familial match. Now, you're not going to get a direct match. I don't know of any cases where they've gotten a direct match where somebody who has left their DNA at a crime scene went back and uploaded their DNA to a public database. That would be kind of crazy.
Yeah, they're probably not going to put their DNA out there voluntarily.
It could happen, but normally
they might want to know if they came from New Zealand or
that's true.
Some country of origin.
That's true.
But how does a familial match help you?
Yeah. So what happens is there's DNA. It's got millions and millions of places where you can match things, and where you can start matching these. If it's close, not everyone has the same DNA. But if you have a family member who's a blood relative, they're going to have very similar DNA at certain points. So they'll look at these certain points on the DNA. And then, just as if they were trying to find a relative, looking for a long lost brother or sister or mother or father, this DNA will do the same thing, and it'll give us people that may be possible connections. So then what these genealogists do is they'll start doing, along with the detectives, they'll start doing detective work, and they'll go to newspapers, family trees, anything. And it's interesting that where they'll find some of these things, and they're usually from, a couple of generations back, and they'll start building that family tree. There's divorce records, there's marriage records, there's all these things where you can start connecting people. I've seen in the last case I worked, a man sued another man for having an affair with his wife, and they would post that in the paper. So now we know these two people were married, and you don't see that very often anymore. But there's so much information, and this is once again that old-fashioned detective work that they go through, birth records, death records, all of these things, and they'll build that family tree from the bottom up, and they'll find common grandparents, and then they can start coming down into the person whose DNA was left at the crime scene. So it's usually like a third or fourth cousin, an aunt, an uncle, or somebody that has uploaded their DNA into this, and then we'll trace their family tree down the side to the family tree of the person whose DNA is left there. Now, a lot of times it comes down to maybe 1, 2, or 3 people, but we can tell from the DNA, for instance, that case that I have in 2003, that Potter case, there was 2 people in that family that had those same matches. One was 75 years old, the other was 45 years old, which was more consistent with somebody that would have committed this murder. He also happened to live in La Mesa at the time. He also happened to have, was the boyfriend of the babysitter of the victim. So now you start really getting in these coincidental, this is way too coincidental. So what we do is when we figure out that it is somebody that's close, they can either get a warrant to get that person's DNA, or get their DNA through a different source, and then compare it to see if it is them. And then you've got the person, because as I said, DNA is very exclusive to that person, and you'll find it. It's really exciting.
So as long as someone's family has uploaded their DNA to one of these services, like a family member somehow, even a distant one, then we can start to build that family tree and narrow our pool of suspects.
And it literally, to do that family tree, and they'll go up, find the common grandparents or great grandparents, and then come down. It takes months. I mean, literally months of painstaking work to go through this, and they're confirming everything through, as I said, the traditional methods. And it's amazing to see it happen. But when the bottom line is, you get to it, you can ultimately test, when you test that person's DNA, if it matches, it matches. Right. If it doesn't match, it doesn't match. So they're tested immediately. The results are tested immediately.
That is so interesting. I was curious, kind of on the flip side, these are cases, like you said, that have been cold for decades sometimes. What is it like when you talk to the victim's family and say, hey, we know what happened. We know who did this.
Yeah, that is probably one of the most powerful moments there are, because, a lot of these people, for instance, going back to the case I have from 1983, there's 2 surviving sisters. They're 87 years old. And so for 40 years, they don't know what happened to their brother. He was found murdered in their house. Wow. And, one of the sisters literally found him, and they don't know. And I mean, when you lose a brother, that's obviously a traumatic event in your life. But when you lose it so tragically and so violently, and you have no answers, it leaves a hole. It leaves a hole in people's lives. So that it is so powerful when you look at that, the surviving victims, and you're able to tell them that. It's amazing to hear. And I know after one of the cases, our boss Summer said, justice may have been delayed, but we'll do our best to make sure it's not denied. And we kind of live by that motto, because it is it's amazing to see, and I think everybody is owed at least an explanation. And it also, in the other way it can be used lately, people, I don't know if you've seen in the news, there was in 2003, a set of legs were found in a dumpster in Rancho San Diego. We had no idea whose legs those were. And then they obviously took a sample of them. Even it was in 1983, they took a sample of it. So we preserved the DNA, or that was in, 2003. So they preserved the DNA, and we're able to do that, loaded the DNA from the legs into the genetic genealogy websites, and we're able to find the son of the woman whose legs they were. So then we were able to, follow, the sheriff's department was able to follow through and find out, we have our ideas of what happened, but just the closure for that son. This is a guy who thought his mom left him in 2003 and never talked to him again.
Wow.
So, and he had some, obviously some pent up resentment, mixed feelings. And then when he finds out she was dead, now she has a reason and an explanation as to why it happened. So it's really, really powerful. And the genetic genealogy is the key to that. And it brings the closure to these people, which is awesome to see.
And the DNA just survives that long on some of the evidence that's stored somewhere in a crime lab or in an evidence locker.
And that's what is so amazing. Like we were talking about Golden State Killer, he committed his crimes between 1974 and 1986. And like I said, we didn't start using DNA until the early 90s, and then most of the jurisdictions in the late 90s. But these police agencies had the wherewithal to collect this DNA evidence and preserve it, which to me is amazing. And in his case, he committed rapes and also committed murders where he left bodily fluids and his own DNA at the scene. So as long as it's preserved, and there was no, now it's very the rule regimented in how you need to keep it and where you need to keep it. But DNA survives basically forever, so long as it doesn't, it's not mixed with something else or contaminated. So it's a very powerful piece of evidence that we use.
Wow. So you guys build this family tree, you narrow your pool of suspects. Like I saw, in the Golden State Killer case, they had multiple people that could have been it. But like you said, this person was maybe in prison at that time that a murder was committed, so they could be eliminated. You build that family tree, and now you have your suspect. How do you go about, if you can talk about it, some of the methods to obtain their DNA in order to make that comparison?
And there's different ways to do it. I'm sure you've seen the crime shows where they'll follow the person around, and if they discard something, they can do it that way. They can look at it, collect it that way. The other thing is, like I said, they can get a search warrant. In the Bunny case, which was a case from 2006 out of La Mesa, we were able to get a search warrant based on all the evidence. And that was a case where the victim was stabbed with a sword over 30 times. And somewhere during the process, the suspect cut himself with the sword, left his blood literally at the scene. So we had that blood and it was collected. And so we were able to match to him. But that was through a search warrant because we had a lot of evidence and we were able to submit that.
Okay.
And a lot of times these people will move too. So we're going through different states. We're involving different agencies, different courts, things like that. The other really interesting thing about this, about collecting the evidence is our investigators, Tony Johnson being one of them, will go out and we'll get family members that we know are close or that could be connected, but we need their sample. So Tony will literally go interview people and ask them, hey, we're investigating a murder and someone from your family is possibly be the victim or possibly be a suspect, and they will give him their DNA. And then we'll have their DNA and then we can load it up into the system and they know what we're doing. It's all, it's all in the up and front. And it's amazing how many people are really willing to do this because they do want to know. And I guess part of it is, I'm looking for a long lost brother, but I also want to know if my cousin murdered somebody before I invite him over to the house next time. So it's kind of an awkward situation, but it's amazing that the public really wants this too. And they look to it as a way to, follow through and make sure they're safe and make sure other people get this closure because you would want it as well if you were in that situation. But it always amazes me how many people, you knock on their door, hey, we're investigating this crime in order to see whether your family member is involved. Obviously it wouldn't be them specifically, but it could be another distant relative. And we ask them and they give it, other people don't, but it'd be a strange situation if someone knocked on your door and said, hey, can I have your DNA? But
that isn't, Brian, I was wondering, you've been doing, a prosecutor now in various counties and in various, areas for 26 years. How is it being in cold case now, sort of towards the end of your career, and what does it mean to you to be doing these types of cases?
It's very I think the best thing, it's powerful and satisfying. And in most of the positions I've been in, I've worked directly with victims of crimes, whether it be in domestic violence, whether it be in sex crimes, in gangs too. In all of those areas, it's had a direct effect on people. When people are victims of crimes, it's terrible. This being the pinnacle, and these are all, it's a cold case homicide unit. So everyone we talk to has been a victim, family member of someone who's been murdered. And like I said, that closure, it really kind of culminates what my career has been about and how I've been able to, get that satisfaction of helping people get that closure. And I can't say it enough how powerful it is and how much it means to these people. They're never going to get their loved one back, but
Right.
to have those answers and to know, like, for instance, my mom didn't get up and leave me. She was murdered,
Right.
So for years you're harboring these guilty feelings towards your mother when you find out that it wasn't her fault. And so to me, that's been awesome and been really powerful. And I love coming to work every day for that reason alone. Plus, I mean, these cases are, like Jorge said in the beginning, like something out of a movie. It's always something where it's, science coming together with people and, combining the two. And as they say, the science doesn't lie. And with the DNA and the genetic genealogy, it doesn't lie. And that's something it's in stone. So that's interesting. One of the difficulties I have noticed is when these cases are old, sometimes we have difficult finding witnesses and getting witnesses, and with witnesses that are even alive themselves. So,
or their memory, or see what they remember of the scene.
Yeah, and the memories. I'm amazed at how many people actually do. If you're somehow related to a murder investigation, hopefully it's only once in your life, and it is something that you do remember. So it amazes me. I just did a prelim on a case where a woman came in who had, from 1983 case, and she was being peppered by the defense attorney about what color the shirt the suspect was wearing. The allegation was he left the bar, murdered the person, and then came back. And the witness said, yeah, I know and she'd never said this in the initial statement, but she said, what was interesting about him is I noticed he had changed his shirt. And I said, how could you remember he changed his shirt? And she said, well, he was homeless at the time and I let him keep his clothes at my house. And the fact that his shirt had changed and he came back to the bar led me to believe he's at my house when I wasn't there, and I would never allow that to happen. So that was something that was 38 years later that I would have never known to ask the question, and it just came out. So I'm always amazed at what people do remember and what they see. But like I said, I think this, usually if you're being questioned on a murder case, it is something that is pretty powerful in your life at that time. So,
well, we appreciate, your hard work on these cases. And I know that the community, and especially, like you said, those individual family members, I think it's life-changing for them. So thank you for all of that and the information, because, I think a lot of people really don't know how cold cases get solved. And we know about DNA, how powerful it is, but genetic genealogy and what it has done to reopen these cold cases is really fantastic.
And it's great that this office has this unit and has you as a prosecutor in this unit, and Tony Johnson too. I know him, and he's a great investigator, and just the whole mantra of just never giving up, of really you guys never give up on any of these murder cases. And I think that's fantastic. So thank you for your service. Appreciate it. Well, that almost brings us to a close, because we end the show each time with something a little light, and we look at the laws on the books. So in this episode, I was trying to find some laws that are really old, because Brian, you're an expert in cold
really
cases.
No, he wasn't going to say that,
that too.
But,
That too. I was 3 years old in 1983, so just to put a point on it. But so I went ahead and looked at some California penal codes. You guys are all experts. Brian, you've been a prosecutor for 26 years. You've encountered the penal code once or twice.
I've heard of it.
So we're going to look at the laws on the books. 3 are real, 1 is fake, and you have to guess which one is fake. Are you guys ready?
Ready or not.
All right. Here we go. Penal Code section number 1. This code shall apply to all persons who reside, pass through, or otherwise perambulate within the state of California. Penal Code section number 2. This code takes effect at 12 o'clock noon on the first day of January, 1873. Penal Code section 3. No part of it is retroactive unless so declared. And finally, Penal Code section number 4. The rule of common law that penal statutes are to be strictly construed has no application to this code. All of these were passed in 1872. I remember that well. And these are old laws still on the books. 1 is fake, 3 are real. Brian, since you are our guest, you get to decide which one is fake first. What are your thoughts?
Wow. Number 1 was somewhat interesting. What was the word perambulate? I don't know what that means, so I might guess that one just because of that. Number 2, the date is so specific, and I know California became a state in 1850, and 1873 kind of is almost 25 years after that. So I'm going to go with number 2 just because of the date specific. And I think maybe the date's wrong.
Okay. Good thinking.
That's
Lori?
a pretty good guess, because this one's tricky, Jorge. I think you might have stumped me for the first time. I don't think you came up with the perambulate word, so I'm thinking that one's not fake. But I don't know. I don't know your lexicon. Maybe you've got some hidden words there that I didn't. That would be impressed with in a minute. I'm gonna go with. Oh gosh, I'm gonna go with D. D is in dog. Penal Code section 4. It sounds like that could be true, but I'm just wondering. Common law, can come from a variety of sources. I'm wondering if that say it doesn't apply. I'm just not sure. So I'm gonna go with D.
All right, so let's go ahead and take these in order. Penal Code section number 1, it says, this code shall apply to all persons who reside, pass through, or otherwise perambulate within the state of California. Now, do you know what the term perambulate means?
No idea.
Any guesses? Ambulate, it has that ambulate is basically to walk through. However, this one is the fake. I tricked you all.
You did with your fancy word.
Fancy words. I didn't know this word before I found it. I was looking through different code sections throughout the nation, and I found this word in New Hampshire's code, like section number 1, where they say they require someone with the New Hampshire legislator to perambulate the state to define the boundaries with its neighboring states, Vermont and such. So this one is the fake. I finally won against Lori.
It's amazing.
Hooray. And it's with the penal code.
You should celebrate all day today, Jorge.
I was thinking about this the other day because I'm like, I know Penal Code section 7. I don't know what 1, 2, and 3 or 4. Penal Code section number 1 is actually, this act shall be known as the Penal Code of California, and it is divided into 4 parts as follows: of crimes and punishment, of criminal procedure, of the state prison and county jails, of prevention of crimes and apprehension of criminals. So that is Penal Code section number 1. Next time you get cite to it in your briefings.
Well, thank you, Jorge. That's very good. That was very good.
Yeah. So Penal Code section number 2 is this code it says this code takes effect at 12 o'clock noon, first day, January 1873. Yeah, you're right, Brian. They took a while to pass the Penal Code, it seems. Yeah. Maybe it was pretty lawless in California.
Wild, Wild West.
Yeah. Thank you for playing the quiz. I'm glad I finally swept Lori or beat Lori for one. Brian, I don't know if you know, but Lori has beat me every single time. So she was bound to lose.
It was going to happen. It was going to happen sooner or later.
With a really tricky penal code quiz here. Brian Erickson, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Really appreciate you coming on and telling us all about cold case homicides and genealogy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And until next time, this is the Crime News Insider Podcast. Expressed on this podcast are solely of the speakers and do not reflect the views of the Deputy DA's Association nor the District Attorney. Questions and comments can be submitted through our website at sdddaa.net. Remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @SanDiegoDDAs. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.